Welcome, everybody, to a very special edition of the Undisrupted Podcast live here at Visti. We are joined with a very special guest, and before we introduce her, we have a question for you, Adam, first of all. All right, so you're experiencing the live in-person. This is kind of our second time doing this. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about the in-person conference in general?
The in-person conference, I am so happy that we're back in person, seeing real people. It's like, I want to be creepy, but like I can touch a person right now.
That is creepy, actually. Stop that. Yeah, no. So I'll bring in Amy. This is Amy Jackson, y'all, and you can follow her at?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Amy, also ask you the same question. Thoughts on in-person? You're back at in-person. We're at Visti at a beautiful Hotel Roanoke here in Roanoke, Virginia.
I love in-person, but I do value the virtual side of it because we all can't get away. But in-person just feels better because you get to, I have worked with people for over 2 years in Visti that I've never seen in person until yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just did a virtual session I did a session that was part virtual but part in person. And it was fun. It was interesting because some of the activities I had the audience do, it was interesting doing it verbally and in person. It took them longer than the chat. People were in the chat going crazy over stuff, but the audience was actually struggling. It was different. Remember when we did the alphabet? She was just in my last session, so a plug for my last session. No, sorry. Sorry, Adam. But yeah, I agree. I think that there's something, and we heard it with the audience today when we did our keynote, that there's some people that can't be here that are now here, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my follow-up question to you is what do you think the future of the conference is, future of conferences in general?
I think it's going to be concurrent.
Okay, so
I think it'll have to be because educators are going to kind of require it, and even jobs are going to require it because they can't send all of their staff, but all of their staff needs the experience. And I think that's been the hardest thing as a leader is I want all of my people to go, but I can't afford it for everybody to go in person because of travel or whatever. But if half of them can go in person and half of them can go virtual.
Yeah, especially this year, we've been fighting with getting substitute teachers. So for someone like myself, people who don't require subs, it's easier for us to go. Administrators as well. You can leave possibly in your
What does
AP
that say about you, by the way, your job, that you don't need a sub? I can leave and those schools still be fine. In fact, it might even run better when I'm not there.
Well, because we're answering the emails 24/7. I mean, that's ultimately once you leave the classroom, you're on call 24/7. I mean, AP, principal, director, coordinator, specialist, whatever, you're on call 24/7. So we've always been remote, if you will, with our work. We've always had to be connected to a device when something's not working. They're like, oh, this isn't working. The phones aren't on. People can't access something. So we've always had that thing. But I think now with the concurrent, it's allowing teachers to be able to hop in during their plan period and do a session. I've seen some schools where they've modified their workday, where teachers have picked the sessions that they wanted to attend, and then they kind of do a coverage within their building to allow them to, hey, if I want to check out Carl's session at 11, but my plan period's not till 1, somebody's going to come in and cover me, and then I cover them. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility as far as being able to attend these concurrent sessions. But nothing beats being able to reach out and touch someone. And earlier, sorry, Miss Jackson.
He is for real. Oh, I forgot to ask too. Let's tell the audience what you do. Why are you here, by the way? You're not just sitting here, but yes. What do you tell us what you do for a living?
I am the supervisor of ed tech and programs for the Arlington Public Schools.
The Arlington Public Schools.
It's official when you put the in front of it.
We're number 2 in the state. We're coming for you, Fairfax.
Oh, calling out Fairfax. You hear that out there, Fairfax? Shots fired. Okay.
Put it up.
Yes. With shots fired, Arlington, there's probably a bad pun in there. So I don't want to go there.
So let me ask you this. So, as we go to these conferences, Carl and I have had this conversation before. Oftentimes, when I'm in the room, and it's happened to me on a few occasions, I've looked around and I'm like, wow, I'm the only black male in this room. And I brought it out to the people hosting it, and they're like, oh, Adam, we didn't even notice. I'm like, okay, well, I did. So let me ask you, have you ever had that same experience being a woman of color, being the only one in the room or one of few?
Yes, that's actually how I got here.
Oh, okay.
So I was originally in Petersburg City Public Schools, and the Richmond area session of Visti is called Gray Tech. Mm-hmm. And so we were at their annual conference, and it was right around the time that Oscar So White was trending. They took a picture, and Karen said, this is not acceptable. Everybody in this picture is a white woman. And so she sent out a form saying, hey, we need to diversify. We need to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force. So me and my co-chair, Dr. Nikki Dowd, at William & Mary, we came in together and we had all these great ideas on how to bridge the gap that we saw, because ed tech is so white.
Yes.
Like, it just is.
It is.
And so I'm frequently the only Black woman in the room in a lot of settings. And so our goal through that task force was to start to bring in minority representation in Virginia. And so we sought out teachers who wanted to be in ed tech mentors, people that we could have those crucial conversations with and say, as you are starting to hire people, they need to be brown, they need to be Black, they need to be disabled, they need to be women, they need to be everything other than just a white male. And so it's working in a lot of spaces, but it is still very much a boys' club. Yesterday in my keynote, I talked about how it's a cement ceiling. It's not a glass ceiling, because the first thing that I have to break is the sexism part of it.
Right.
And the second thing I have to break is the racism part of it. And, it's just a consistent battle of there's always that ceiling that's going to stop me because somebody in the room doesn't believe I belong there.
And we talked to Jennifer and Brianna on a previous podcast. I was talking to Brianna Hodges, who's a good friend of the podcast, friend of ours, and she talked about just the gender bias that happens when, as a male, and I go out and I'm speaking at conferences, everyone's like, oh, that's great, you're going out and doing that. She went out and spoke at conferences like, who's taking care of the kids while you're gone? But they never asked me that. Yeah. And it was a really eye-opening thing for me, at least on the gender side of it. And again, a father of 3 girls, I'm always kind of acutely aware of it. But how do we break, I guess, this? Because we were talking before the podcast started about how 80% of our field is female, but 80% of the leadership is male. What are your ideas? I mean, you talk about a task force, but what are your ideas for kind of breaking through that cement ceiling as you talk about? Where do we start with this?
Jackhammer.
Yes. How do we jackhammer the ceiling?
So it is basically about just fighting against the machine, not really trying to go along to get along. It's no longer about being nice. It's about demanding a seat at the table. And that every time one of us as a minority gets to the table, we bring 2 more people with us. And that's just how it is. A lot of times people will say that you're really good in your craft and we want you to come. That's your opportunity to say, I will come, but I'm bringing, these people because these are my people. They are good at, and just uplifting each other, making sure that when you are in a room of opportunities, you are naming other minority people so that their names can get in those sessions. Karen is like that.
Awesome.
If she is at the table, everybody she knows is at that table, and she's going to highlight women and minorities all the time.
And to your point, it's like, so with this also, there are some allies that you have to have in this process. So as you mentioned, breaking through, it's a whole lot easier to break through when someone who is above it is breaking it down.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're trying to come up from the bottom, if they're at the top breaking it down, helping you out in that process, because as a male, a Black male, in education, I brought it out a couple of times when I go to conferences, and I've noticed that women who were maybe breastfeeding and needed a location to take care of what they need to take care of, there's not those spaces, those little mommy pods in a venue. They do have them here at this hotel, which is amazing.
That's awesome.
But you'll go to a place and it's like, okay, if this conference is a teacher-centered conference, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of female teachers in this space, you're not taking into consideration their needs or whatever. So, I mean, whether you're talking about a conference or in a school building, like how many school buildings have those places, those structures in place? It's just so many things that unless you have those people at the table to bring it to someone's attention, it may not have bad intentions, but if they're not thinking about it, then it's like, oh, well, it looks normal to me, because normal to me may be the absence of you. And when you're there, it's abnormal to me because I'm not used to you sitting at the table with me. Now you're asking me questions and things that you're making me question life as itself. So, but those are those things that need to happen. We need to disrupt the norm. Normal is not okay for everybody because it hasn't been okay for a lot of folks.
And I really think that normal isn't really normal for the majority. Normal is only normal for a set few. And those set few are typically cisgendered white men. Yep. And so they're comfortable in every space, and it's time for them to be uncomfortable so that we can get to where we need to go, because we're not going to move. My dissertation is on imposter syndrome in Black women leaders in K through 12, and it's just a lot about, is it us not really feeling like we don't know what we're doing, or is it the systemic racism that is fueling our ability to do our jobs well, because it's always that stereotype of you're either angry and aggressive, or you're the mammy figure, or you're the superhero that's supposed to come in and fix everything all the time. And so it's like, we are not those people. We are not those stereotypes. Just like every white man is not a Brad. Like every
or
white
Carl.
or Carl.
I mean, I'm sorry, but yes, I don't have a great name for that, but yeah.
And it's not this idea, like, in doing my research, I came across white fatigue, and it's like, well, we're just tired of talking about it. Yeah, and I'm tired of living it. I'm tired of fighting that fight every day as a woman in tech. Like, I hate that people literally ask me questions like, "Can you do that?" Yeah, I can't. Probably better than you, but I mean, it's just this system in place that just is always like, this is where you sit, this is where you are supposed to go, this is how far you can go. And even like yesterday, I talked about how in Virginia, a lot of the male tech directors are tech directors, but a lot of the female people who sit in those top leadership positions are not directors.
Specialists.
They're coordinators, specialists, supervisors. And it's like, how am I not a director when if a man took my position, he would immediately be made a director?
Right.
That's the systematic part that always gets me. And I think as a white male coming up to the system myself, it was a lot of like, well, you're the one white male on this campus, so therefore you're the tech guy, even though I wasn't. But the system, even the people that are actually in the system that are being oppressed by it, sometimes lift it up too, because it's the norm they're used to. So what you're talking about is shattering through a lot of that, and it's being what you don't always see. And I think I talked to Franz Davis about this years ago, and she told me, she said, you can't be what you don't see. And she goes, when you go to conferences and you see that same white-haired white male up on stage all the time, if you're someone of color, you think to yourself, like, could that ever be me at that point?
Right.
It can't, because I always see the same person. So breaking through that is a huge
It's
thing.
one of those things that's very interesting. If you ask students and find a picture of insert whatever, a scientist, find me a picture of an astronaut, look at what they pull up. Are they going to pull up somebody who looks like them? Them meaning, if I'm an Indian student, if I'm a Latino, am I going to find a Latino scientist and pull that up? Like, oh, this is when I look up scientists, this is what I pulled up. Or am I going to pull up a white male? Or am I going to pull up Albert Einstein or something? Like, do I know any scientists or any doctors or any people who look like me? So it's very interesting that we kind of create our own reality around what normal is, even if you're in this system, you're in this matrix, if you will, and it's like, this is normal. It's normal when I see this, and it's abnormal when I see myself, because it's like, I'm not used to seeing people who look like me in this, because it would blow my mind, honestly, Carl, if I went to a conference and I saw all black and brown.
If I was the unicorn, right?
Yes,
right.
Tech directors. It would blow my mind. I wouldn't know how to act. I'd be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? What's going on?
Well, it starts with children. I mean, I've talked to Ken Shelton about this a number of times. He talks about children's literature too. And 70% of the protagonist characters are always a white child, right? And sometimes you'll get now some cases where they're starting to change some of that in books, but it's not being rejected, but it's just being thought of as different. And people, of course, freak out. They're like, oh, you're whitewashing history. No, we're not. We're actually leveling the playing field like the way it should have been. But it's still funny to me that we get in arguments all the time. And Texas, mind you, is not always the most progressive state. So we're always trying to level set that. But I think it's small incremental changes, and the things you're talking about is a big part of it. So for a classroom teacher out there listening right now who maybe is aspiring to do something different, to take on that leadership role, what advice would you give them?
The first advice I give them is to tweet me a direct message so that I can put them into the mentorship program through VISTI, so that they can get paired with a ed tech leader in Virginia, so we can groom them into being a tech leader themselves and get them in front of conferences and in the right places so that we can get them into position. The second thing that I would tell them is just be you. Be authentic in who you are and own your craft, and make sure that you don't allow anybody to dull you as you are on your journey. And remember that being you doesn't mean be mean. It just means owning who you are and knowing that you have places to grow, but you also are the master of your craft in certain areas and to live in it.
And where can they tweet you?
At Tech You Very Much.
So let me ask you this, like, go back to the classroom piece. Have you noticed a difference in what students have been able to create or do with technology as it relates to representing their true self as it relates to technology? Because oftentimes, the projects and things that we have as students may not be necessarily relevant to their experience or their standard of living or their environment. Have you seen, in your experience, a shift or a change of anything, of people being more aware? And if not, what are some things that people can do to become more aware, becoming more
Culturally represented.
exactly of what they're doing in a classroom?
I think we're trying to get to a place where we're culturally responsive, and one of the things that I talk about in my class for UVA Wise is that being culturally responsive is not about highlighting minority representation. It's about being culturally responsive to the people in your class. So if your class is all white, all rural, you're going to be responsive to them and the culture that they understand, and that's how you're going to connect with them. If you are in an inner city where you have minority students, you're going to think about their culture and how to make it relevant for them. If you're in the suburbs, you're not going to talk about rural, because those kids don't understand that. They don't understand what it is to rope a cow, or to be in 4-H, or to show a pig. They are going to know other things, and you have to be able to highlight those things for them and allow them to explain their knowledge through the things that they are comfortable with. And we aren't whitewashing anything, and we're not, trying to take over anything. It's really just about saying, okay, kiddo, how do I get to you so that you can give me what I need? Because at the end of the day, my goal is to make sure that you understand this application of this content that I'm teaching you, not whether or not you understood, why Scout did what she did and Winn-Dixie. It's really about you being able to tell me who is the main idea, what were the character traits, how did we move through the story, how did the author provide those things, so that you can take that knowledge and expand it everywhere else.
That's a big part of it. You have to I think you have to make that connection. Before kids can learn, you have to have a connection with them, which means you also have to listen to them to get that, to have them also lean in towards you and get that learning to make it happen.
I think one of the other things that a lot of people try to do to make things culturally responsive is kind of the culture vulture. You don't have to floss to connect with
I don't have to make a rap song.
I don't have to dab. That's awful.
Put my hat on backwards and say, "Yo, kids."
Here we go with the stereotypes.
As a Black woman, we have never flossed in my classroom. Number one, I can't do it, so there's that.
Breaking the 2x4. That's what you do.
I saw that and I was like, I'm going to practice that later. I taught a heavy ESL population, and I did not disrespect their culture by trying to make myself a part of it. I allowed them to let me into their culture as they felt comfortable.
I love that. Yeah. It's all about, because I said it in my last session with the group, in the classroom, creating those mirror and window opportunities for your students. I know for me, teaching where I've taught in Georgia, it's a situation where a lot of students are trapped, if you will, by what their mom, dad have given them exposure to. And so sometimes you have to open them up to, okay, not every person may fall under this stereotype that you may see. We're not trying to change their, liberalize, their kid or anything. It's like, hey, we just want to know that, there's other things out there other than what you have just seen at your house. Let's just give you more literature. Let's give you more technology activities, collaboration, pairing you up with different students. Even looking at how technology can allow you to bridge the gap between different campuses and working with students. Because we, oftentimes you hear about teachers wanting to do things with another country. It's like, okay, let's do it within our own area.
One side of town to the other side.
Yeah.
How about one classroom to another classroom?
Yes. Right next door to each other. You have your door closed and you don't know what's going on right next to you. So speaking of finding literature and finding work, where can people find more information besides just your Twitter account, which is great too? Where else are you posting all of the content that you're putting out there? Are you blogging, or what are you doing?
I mean, take a university class with you?
I know, right?
They can take a class with me at UVA Wise. I teach diversity in the classroom course for them. I will start back up in the spring.
Awesome.
I also own Equitably Guided Education. It is on, my 12-year-old told me I was Googleable, so you can Google me and find me. I do not have the patience or follow through to blog. I have several blogs I have started, and they last about a month and a half, and I'm like, people do this every week or every 2 weeks. I was like, I don't have anything to say.
Do you podcast?
I do not.
This could be.
I hate my voice.
No,
Oh,
you have a
lovely
great
voice.
We
Lovely
need to
voice.
hear. We
Yes.
need to hear from more voices like yours. I think that's what's important.
Hear the voice. We need to read a book about you, of you.
Yes.
You all can read my dissertation, KL May 2022. You can get it on ProQuest. I'll make sure that the Virginia State University post it.
Yeah, we'll add it on the link.
Links. That's
Yes.
right. I know she's emphasizing the a lot. That's like
Yes.
the Ohio State University.
Yes.
the
Yes, yes.
Virginia. Okay. I got it. Well, this has been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much. This has been the Future Ready. This has been the Undisrupted podcast brought to you by Future Ready Schools. He's Adam, and you can follow him at AskAdam3.
And he's Carl, and you can follow him at Mr. Hooker. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, we are better together.
And we are better
Undisrupted.
This podcast is made possible by the generous support of Amazon Web Services.